The house on Pine Hollow Road was not remarkable. 2 bedrooms, slightly overgrown garden, and an antique mirror hanging in the hallway. That mirror is why I am telling you this. I did not buy the mirror. Came with the place. No one mentioned it. No one warned me. My name is Alan Whitmore. I work in local government and transferred into a quiet town after a rough year. New start. New home. The house was old, yes, but charming in that storybook way. I had no reason to question anything until the mirror whispered. It was a name at first. My name. Low and hoarse, as if someone were trying not to wake a baby in the next room. That is not something you forget. If you ever move into a new home and the mirror greets you before the neighbors do, listen to me carefully, get out while you still can. When I first stepped into the house, it was raining softly. The smell of wet earth drifted in with me as I crossed the threshold. The real estate agent, a woman named Tilda, handed me the keys and smiled with a kind of distant satisfaction. She said the house had belonged to an elderly couple, now deceased. No children, no heirs, just a property waiting for a new chapter. The place needed work. Peeling paint in the corners, a few cracked tiles in the bathroom, and that creaking floorboard in the hallway that screamed for attention every time someone passed by. Still, it was mine. I had lived in smaller places with more problems. I moved in with only a few things. Some clothes, books, a coffee table that leaned slightly to the left, and my cat, Jasper. He was a rescue, black furred with green eyes, quiet unless he was hungry. He disappeared the moment we entered the house. I found him later curled up in the back of a wardrobe, eyes wide open, tail twitching. There was no furniture in the house except for that mirror in the hallway. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, framed in oak carved with curling ivy patterns. It looked older than the house itself. I assumed the previous owners had been unable to move it, or simply left it for aesthetic purposes. There was a certain artistry in its design, something both beautiful and unnerving. The glass was perfectly clean, no cracks, no smudges, almost too clean. I had never paid much attention to mirrors. They were tools. You used them to check if your shirt was on straight or if there was toothpaste on your chin. This one, however, drew my eyes constantly. Something about the way it caught the light, even when there was barely any, made it impossible to ignore. Jasper refused to walk past it. He would stand at the edge of the hallway, eyes locked on the mirror, and let out low, guttural growls. At first, I laughed it off. Animals were sensitive, sure, but that did not mean he was seeing ghosts. Still, I began to avoid looking at it for too long. There was something unpleasant about the way my reflection lingered a second too long after I had moved. By the end of the first week, I was mostly unpacked. I had started a new position at the local office, Grant Compliance Manager, a title only mildly more exciting than it sounded. My days were quiet, my evenings filled with small tasks and background jazz. It was exactly the life I thought I wanted. One evening, just before 11 o'clock, I walked past the mirror on my way to bed. I had brushed my teeth, shut off the living room lights, and was heading to the bedroom when I heard it. A whisper. Faint. Fleeting. I stopped. Turned. Silence. I laughed. It had been a long day. My ears were playing tricks on me. Maybe it was the wind or a neighbor through thin walls. But I lived alone. Detached property. No neighbors close enough to hear. I stood there for a full minute, staring at my reflection. It stared back just as it should. My breathing. My blinking. My every movement. Still, I left the hallway light on that night. 2 days later, I heard it again. This time, there was no doubt. It was just after 10 o'clock in the evening. I was washing dishes, the radio humming softly in the background, when Jasper let out a hiss so sharp it shattered the calm. He darted out of the kitchen, paws scrambling over the hardwood floor, straight toward the back bedroom. I followed him, drying my hands on a towel, a little annoyed but more concerned. That was when I heard it again. Alan. A whisper. My name. Soft, deliberate and wrong. It came from the hallway. I froze. The house was still. No radio static, no hum from the refrigerator. Just silence, and that word. My name. Whispered like a secret. I inched back toward the kitchen doorway and peeked out into the hallway. The mirror stood there. Still, quiet, harmless. but my heart was racing. I felt that heavy sensation in my chest, like being underwater. I waited, listening, but the voice did not return. The air felt colder near the mirror, the kind of cold that seeps into your skin, not from lack of heat, but from something else entirely. I walked up to it, slow, step by step, until I stood inches from the glass. My reflection stared back. Normal. Nothing strange. But the hallway behind me, reflected in the mirror, looked off. It was darker than it should have been. The shadows were longer. I leaned closer. There was movement. I spun around. Nothing. No one. I turned back to the mirror. Just my reflection. Perfectly still. I did not sleep well that night. I turned the mirror around to face the wall, something I should have done earlier, but had not out of laziness or denial. It was a stupid, childish gesture, as if not seeing it would solve whatever was wrong. But it did not stop the whispers. The following morning, I told myself it was a dream, a hallucination, maybe. Sleep deprivation. I was under stress. New job, new town, new house. My brain was playing tricks on me. I searched the hallway for any hidden speakers or sources of sound. I even checked the attic, thinking maybe the wind was passing through cracks and creating strange noises. Nothing. Every vent, every pipe, every corner of the house was exactly as it should be. The mirror remained turned toward the wall, but I could feel it watching me. I know that sounds ridiculous. Mirrors do not have eyes. But something about the pressure in that hallway made my skin crawl. Jasper refused to go near it. He would hiss at the wall the mirror faced, as if he knew something I did not. One afternoon, I decided to move it into the basement. The thing was heavier than it looked. I had to drag it down the stairs inch by inch. The glass never cracked, not even a scratch. The frame was solid wood, carved thick and ornate. The ivy pattern wrapped around the top in loops and spirals, elegant but suffocating. I placed it at the far end of the basement and covered it with a canvas cloth I found in the garage. That night, I slept better. No whispers. No chills. Jasper even seemed calmer. But the relief did not last. 2 days later, I came home from work to find the mirror standing in the hallway again. Still covered, still silent. But there. I know what you are thinking. I must have imagined moving it. Or I forgot. But I remembered the strain in my arms. I remembered the sound of it scraping along the basement steps. I remembered because I had bruises on my fingers from gripping the frame too tightly. And there it was. As if it had never left. I stood in front of it, breath shallow, and pulled the cloth off slowly. My reflection stared back. But behind me, in the mirror's world, someone else was standing at the end of the hallway. Not in reality. Only in the reflection. By the time I turned around, there was nothing there. The mirror began to change the house. It sounds impossible, but it is the truth. The layout, the light, the temperature, all of it shifted depending on where the mirror was placed. If I left it in the hallway, the house grew colder. My dreams turned vivid and twisted. I would wake up in a sweat, hearing whispers echo from the corners of the room. If I moved it to the guest room, the bulbs in that room would flicker and burst. I replaced them twice. Then I gave up. For a day, I moved it to the garage, wedging it between some paint cans and an old desk. That night, the garage door opened by itself. At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, the whispering became more frequent, always just out of reach. I would be in the kitchen and hear my name from the laundry room. I would rush over, nothing. In the shower, behind the steam, I heard full sentences, muffled but urgent. Help him. Not safe. Look closer. I began to record the audio at night. Nothing ever came up. Just static. Jasper began hiding more. He lost weight. His fur dulled. The vet said it was stress, maybe something in the environment. I knew better. He was terrified. Of the house. Of the mirror. Of me. One night, the whisper changed tone. It was not pleading anymore. It was mocking. I was brushing my teeth around 10:30 when I caught movement in the mirror above the sink. At first, I thought it was just me turning slightly. But then I froze. My reflection continued brushing its teeth for a second too long. I stepped back. It stepped forward. I ran. That was the first night I tried to leave. I packed a small bag, grabbed Jasper, and headed for the front door. It would not open. The lock turned, the knob twisted, but the door would not budge. The windows were the same. I tried to call someone, anyone, but the line buzzed with silence. No dial tone. No signal. I stood in the hallway, breathless, bag on my shoulder, Jasper clawing at the inside of the carrier. The mirror had moved again. Back to its original place. Uncovered. And this time, the reflection was not mine at all. I did not sleep that night. The mirror remained in the hallway, standing like a sentinel. I stayed on the couch with every light in the house on and Jasper curled tight against my chest, trembling. By morning, the door opened without resistance. I did not question it, I needed answers. I visited the county records office, a short drive into town. My job in government had its advantages. I had access to property histories and archives the average homeowner never bothered to check. The file on my house was thin, built in the late 1930s, owned by the Pearsons for 42 years. No criminal reports, no structural complaints. But there was one note in the margin of an old maintenance request from 1984. Occupant claims mirror speaks at night. No action required. I asked the archivist if there were any personal documents, wills, letters, anything. She brought out a faded envelope sealed in a plastic bag. The handwriting was shaky but legible. It was addressed to the next owner. That meant me. I opened it with gloved hands. This house holds more than memories. Do not listen to her. The mirror belongs to the widow, and she cannot rest. She whispers promises and lies. She wants to be seen, but she cannot cross unless invited. Do not answer her. Do not speak to her. Whatever she offers, refuse it. You cannot destroy her. Only bury her. It was signed only with the letter E. The mirror had a name now, her. It was not just an object anymore. It was something with a will, a presence, a voice that had outlived the walls around it. I asked the archivist if she had ever heard of anyone else having problems on Pine Hollow Road. She hesitated, then shook her head. But something about the pause in her expression told me she knew more than she let on. I thanked her and left. When I returned home, I found every mirror in the house shattered, except the one in the hallway. I decided to end it that night. I retrieved a hammer, thick gloves, and a crowbar from the shed. I wore heavy boots and taped a flashlight to my shoulder. Jasper was locked safely in his carrier, tucked in the furthest bedroom with music playing softly. I stood before the mirror for what felt like hours before I moved. It looked no different. My reflection stood firm, but the space behind me was wrong. Too dark. Too quiet. I lifted the hammer and brought it down with everything I had. The glass cracked. Finally, a hairline fracture ran across the middle like lightning frozen in time. But before I could swing again, I heard it. Laughter. It was high and wet, like water being squeezed through a throat that had not worked in years. The light in the hallway flickered, then popped, plunging the space into shadow. I turned on the flashlight. My reflection was gone. Not changed. Gone. The hallway behind the mirror was now a stone corridor. The walls were rough, wet, and lined with mirrors just like mine. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Each one showing different people, different lives. Some screamed silently. Others stared directly at me, their mouths open in impossible shapes. Something moved inside the mirror. Not a reflection. A figure. She stepped forward slowly, her face indistinct, as if water ran down glass just over her skin. Her eyes were holes of smoke, and her mouth twisted into a grin that barely held together her translucent face. I fell back, crawling away, but the mirror shimmered, and she stepped out. Not through the glass. Through the shadows. The hallway stretched and warped, walls bowing inward as if the house were breathing. I swung the hammer, but it passed through her as if she were steam. She whispered something. I do not know the words, but my ears bled. I screamed. Jasper howled from the back room. And then, in a single moment, the house snapped back to normal. I was on the floor. The mirror was whole again. And the woman, but she had left something behind. A single crack in the bottom right corner of the mirror. Thin. And bleeding. Not glass. blood. The house had become a cage, and I was its only living prisoner. That night, the temperature dropped. Not outside, inside. The walls sweated with condensation, and my breath fogged before my lips. I wrapped myself in 2 blankets and sat against the bedroom door, hammer in one hand, flashlight in the other, and Jasper silent at my feet. It was midnight when the humming started. Not whispering, not talking, humming. A slow, off-key lullaby, drifting through the vents, slinking beneath door frames, vibrating the floorboards under my feet. My skin bristled as if the sound were reaching through my pores. I stood up, flashlight shaking in my hand. The hallway light flickered once, twice, then died completely. The only illumination came from the flashlight's beam and a dull red glow bleeding from beneath the hallway carpet, like a fire smoldering deep beneath the foundation. I crept into the hallway. Every step I took creaked louder than the one before. At the end of the corridor, the mirror stood waiting. It had moved again. I had left it in the basement hours ago, wrapped in canvas and rope. Now it stood tall, exposed, clean, shining with a light that did not belong in this world. As I drew closer, the humming became singing. A woman's voice. Sultry, old-fashioned. Not modern. Something out of a ballroom from the early 20th century. I could hear the words now. Something about dancing forever. Something about not leaving. Inside the mirror, the hallway was no longer mine. It was deeper, darker, and filled with people, shadows of people. Some walked slowly, aimlessly. Some stared directly at me, hands pressed against the inside of the glass. All of them moved as if walking underwater. And she was there, standing in the center of it all. The woman from before. This time, she had a face. It was wrong. Her features shifted, blended, as if someone had painted several faces on top of one another. Her eyes found me, and the humming stopped. She did not walk toward the glass. She glided. No movement of legs. Just forward. She raised a hand and pressed it against the other side. I should have run. I should have smashed the mirror again. Instead, I raised my own hand and touched the glass. It was warm. And then I was no longer in the hallway. The air changed. It tasted like rot and wet stone. I stood in the mirrored world, surrounded by hushed voices, the walls echoing with weeping and distant laughter. The air shimmered around the woman, distorting like heat waves over asphalt. "Why did you come here?" she asked, though her lips never moved. The words formed inside my head, cold and alien. "I did not mean to," I said. "Let me go." She smiled and the world shuddered. "There is no leaving," she said. Something grabbed my arm. I turned to see a man with no eyes. His skin looked like cracked marble, and his hands felt like ice. Another figure emerged from the shadows. A girl, maybe 12 years old, mouth sewn shut with thread. She reached for my other hand. "No," I shouted. "Let me go." The woman laughed. "You brought us back. You spoke to me. That is all it takes." I felt myself sinking. The floor turned to liquid beneath my feet. My legs dropped through the surface like wet cement. I thrashed, swung the hammer, screamed until my throat tore. And then, a flash of light. A scream, not mine. "Jasper!" From beyond the mirror. The sound tore through the air like a siren, high-pitched and panicked. The woman shrieked. The hands loosened. The world tilted. And then I was back, lying on the hallway floor. Jasper was sitting on my chest, his fur bristled, pupils wide, his body vibrating with fear. The mirror was still there, but the hallway behind it was now empty. Just a reflection of my own home. Blood dripped from the corners of the frame. Thin streams, like tears. I could not move for nearly 10 minutes. My muscles had locked. My throat burned. My chest felt bruised. When I finally stood up, I backed away from the mirror and dragged it, with all the strength I had left, back down to the basement. I wrapped it in every canvas, curtain, and blanket I could find. I duct-taped it into a cocoon. Then I built a wall of shelves, boxes, and furniture in front of it. And I prayed it would stay that way. I left the house 2 days later. I did not sell it. I did not clean it. I walked away. Found a small apartment in the next town. Told the office I needed remote hours due to personal trauma. They agreed after one look at my face. Jasper began recovering within a week. He gained weight, started purring again. I kept every mirror in the apartment covered, including the one in the bathroom. Then, 3 weeks later, I received a letter. It had no return address. Inside was a photograph of me, standing in the mirrored hallway. Only, my reflection was smiling. And I was not. There was a note scribbled on the back. "She knows your name now." I burned it. I threw the ashes in a public trash bin 10 blocks from home. But I kept the blinds closed. A few nights later, I was taking out the trash when I saw something in the building across the alley. A light on, a window open, and a mirror. My mirror. Oak-framed. Ivy carvings. It stood against a wall just like before. And there, barely visible in the reflection, was a figure. Not mine. Hers. She lifted a hand and waved. I froze. My heart beat like a hammer in my chest, the sound so loud I was sure the entire building could hear it. My breath came in shallow gasps, but my legs wouldn't move. I had to stay still. If I moved, if I blinked, maybe I'd disappear, maybe I'd slip into some other world where she couldn't follow. But I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. She was out there, watching, waiting, and she knew me. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the reflection in the window. My pulse echoed in my ears, a distant drumming, while the shadows shifted in the alley below. I didn't want to look back, didn't want to confirm what I already knew. But I couldn't stop myself. I turned, inch by inch, my body protesting the movement, every muscle screaming to run, to hide. The apartment building across from mine was silent, its windows dark. Only the faint glow of that open window cast a pale light into the alley. The mirror was still there. I should have walked away. I should have gone inside, locked the door, and never looked back. But curiosity, the kind of dangerous curiosity that has led to the fall of many before me, pulled me toward it. I crossed the alley before I even realized I had moved, my legs barely responding, moving as if they were made of stone. When I reached the window, I pressed my palm against the cool brick, my fingers trembling. The window was old, the paint chipped, but it wasn't locked. A soft creak as I nudged it open. I peeked inside. The room was small, sparsely furnished. A few old chairs, a lamp with a crooked shade, but it was the mirror that held my attention. It stood tall and proud against the far wall, bathed in the faint light from the alley. The same mirror, the same oak frame, carved with ivy, stretching endlessly upward, gleaming despite the darkness. And in its reflection, there she was. She stood perfectly still, her figure cast in shadows, barely visible. But the smile on her face was unmistakable. It was the same twisted grin that haunted me for weeks. She was real. Not a figment of my imagination, not a trick of the light. She was there, in the mirror, and she was waiting for me. I backed away, nearly tripping over a garbage can, my body moving on pure instinct now. I could feel my heart hammering in my throat, could feel the cold sweat breaking out along my skin. But then, just before I turned to flee, something shifted in the mirror. Her hand. She was lifting it again. Slowly, methodically, like she had all the time in the world. And then she waved. The blood drained from my face. It was all too much, too real, too horrifying. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My body had finally taken control, and before I knew it, I was running. Running back to my apartment, heart racing, every step a frantic plea to escape. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, sliding the deadbolt with shaking hands. My fingers were cold, numb from the fear. I stumbled back to the living room and looked at the window. The blinds were still drawn. The apartment was silent. Except, there it was again. A sound. A knock. So faint, but unmistakable. My breath hitched. It came from the door. It came from the very thing that separated me from the outside world. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The knock came again. Louder this time. Let me in. Her voice was a whisper on the wind, sweet and taunting. The words curled around my mind, settling in with the certainty of something I couldn't escape. The thing in the mirror knew my name. And now she was here. I took a step back, then another until my legs hit the couch. My back hit the wall. I was trapped. There was nowhere left to go. The knock came again, louder this time. "Let me in." Her voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a command, clear and insistent, like a presence that had lived within the walls for years, waiting for its moment. I was paralyzed, my entire body trembling. My mind raced, spiraling through thoughts of escape, but none of them made sense. There was no escaping her. Not anymore. Another knock, and this time the door shuddered in its frame. The sound echoed through the apartment, filling every corner with dread. "I know you're in there." I glanced at the mirror, the one that had started all of this. Her reflection was still there, grinning, waiting. I could feel her not just in the glass, but in the very air around me. The presence, a force that was closing in. I took one final step back, my hand brushing against the wall, searching for some kind of refuge, some sign that I hadn't completely lost control of my own mind. The knock came again, but this time, it wasn't the sound that made me gasp. It was the reflection. In the mirror, her hand had moved. Slowly, deliberately. She lifted it again. But this time, she wasn't waving. She was reaching for me. I stumbled, my breath catching in my throat, and that's when I realized she wasn't just in the mirror anymore. She was in my apartment. Her fingers, long and twisted, crept around the edge of the door, slipping through the crack like dark tendrils of smoke. Her face, now inches away, twisted into a smirk that sent a chill straight through me. I backed away, but it was too late. She was already inside. The final revelation hit me with the force of 1,000 thunderclaps. The woman in the mirror wasn't a ghost. She wasn't some specter of my own mind. She was me. The reflection, the strange, twisted version of myself. It was never a reflection. She was the real one. And I had been the one trapped in the mirror all along. I could feel her presence now, in my own body, controlling my every movement. I struggled, tried to break free, but it was no use. She was me, she had always been me. As my own reflection, the version of me that had been living in the mirror all these years, grinned, I understood the terrible truth. The woman in the mirror had been waiting for me to see her, waiting for me to recognize her, waiting for me to understand. And now that I had, she was taking me back. The knock stopped. The mirror went dark. But when the lights flickered back on, the reflection in the glass was gone. I was gone.